Discharging revolving debt to zero is a great way to start over in life. And I say that because when it comes to the FICO score is broken down into basically 5 different criteria. Number 1 is paying on time. And our definition of paying on time is paying within 30 days of the due date. And that's 35% of our credit score. So that's number 1. Number 2 is going to be our debt levels, our balances, our credit utilization. That's 30% of our FICO score. So basically, to kind of put it in the best illustration, if I have a $10,000 available credit card limit, I want to keep that balance as low as possible. Because if I max it out, with 30% of our credit score being based on balances and credit utilization, I could actually, if I maxed out my credit cards, I could drop like 50 or 100 points right off the bat. So, when people say, I'm really reluctant to file for bankruptcy, if they've already maxed out their credit cards, maybe they haven't been late. I actually looked at a credit report not that long ago. This person had not been late on anything. They had 5 credit cards. They were maxed out on all of them. 3 of them, they were over the limit. They had a 580 FICO score. They haven't been late on anything. They're just over the limit and maxed out, completely maxed out over the limit, and they've got 5 across the board. Now, if they were to have, if they were able to get the funds to pay that down and take, let's say, take that balance to at least just 50% of the available limit, preferably take it down to 0 would be ideal, of course, but let's just say I could take it down. My credit score is going to shift. It's like it's very liquid in terms of whatever the credit utilization is today is going to, that instant, whatever is being reported at this moment is what is going to impact my credit score. So I need to be aware of that going forward. So if in a bankruptcy, if my credit card debt is wiped out, what does that do to my credit utilization ratio? Well, the reality is once I file for bankruptcy, I'm not, those credit cards are going to be gone. So I don't have any available credit anyway, but I also, after the discharge, don't have any debt. So basically I'm at 0. So that actually is quite helpful. Now, one thing I will tell you to do is after the bankruptcy, generally I would say 60 days after your discharge, and I tell us across the board, 60 days after a bankruptcy, 60 days after a foreclosure, 60 days after a short sale, 60 days after paying a collection, whatever your circumstance is, check your credit report to make sure it's reporting correctly. Because one of the things I do see for people is if they have a discharge, is the credit card or the credit cards that were discharged, are they reporting properly? Because if I have a $10,000 available limit and I had a $10,000 or more balance and I was past due and all of that is still reporting in a derogatory nature, and if it's been discharged, it should all be 0. So if it's still reporting, my credit utilization ratio is still really high, and you know what that's doing to my credit score? It's keeping it low artificially, so it's not necessary. And I see that happen. I see people who stick their head in the sand after a bankruptcy and decide I'm not touching credit again. And that generally means I'm not looking at my credit report either. And so 2 to 3 years later, they haven't really improved a whole lot. Their credit is actually not too much better than after they filed for bankruptcy, because guess what? Everything could still be showing past due. They could still have these high credit utilization ratios. They haven't made sure everything was correct. Now, I will say this, in the past 2 years, creditors are doing a much better job than they have previously in updating discharge debt. It used to be, 3 years ago, I would say, I would wager 9 times out of 10 creditors would not update the debts to show that they had been discharged in a bankruptcy. Today, they are much better, but the burden of discovery for an error on your credit report is always on you, the consumer. Nobody is going to do this for you, but guess where most people find out about mistakes? Well, they come to me, they want to buy a house, they need financing, it's been 3 years since their foreclosure or 2 years since their Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and they say, well, I heard I'm eligible. And I say, okay, yeah, you're eligible. I pull the credit report and I say, oh my gosh, you haven't done anything with your credit at all, have you? And they say, yeah, I kind of didn't. And I say, well, yeah, you should have looked at your credit report, because everything that was discharged still shows past due, still shows balances. Your credit scores haven't recovered really because you didn't pull the weeds out. You have to go in there and pull the weeds out. You have to correct your credit report, and only you can do that. Nobody is going to do that for you. You have that right under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You have a right to a correct credit report. but you also have the burden of discovery. As far as the rest of what the FICO score is made up of, its length of history is a big one. And so after a bankruptcy, of course, I have to start over. And I need to reestablish credit and start over with my length of history. And then it's the types of credit that I have. You know, a mortgage is always the best. It's considered the king of the types of credit. Then you've got any type of installment loan. Then you've got revolving. Then you kind of have the separation between major credit cards and department store credit cards. My philosophy has always been any credit that's good, as long as I'm paying it on time and as long as I'm managing it well, is fine. I had a lady, she had 30 credit cards on her credit report. And I ask people, when I teach a class, I say, what kind of credit score do you think she has? And people generally say, oh, she must have a horrible credit score because she has 30 credit cards. That's crazy. Who needs 30 credit cards? Well, nobody needs 30 credit cards, but guess what? She has a 799 FICO score, which is pretty darn good credit score. And so she's got this great credit score. But you might think, why does she have a 799 credit score with 30 credit cards? Well, your credit report has no idea what your income is. It doesn't know what you make. It doesn't know what I make. It doesn't know what Bill Gates makes. It's not part of your record. Now, a lender, in approving you, they consider your income, but your credit report does not. So it's all based on how you manage things. And so she managed it well. Ideally, we want credit cards to be over 7 years old. That's just ideal. Ideally, I want you to have at least 3 credit cards that are over 7 years old. That's your recovery. I want you to get to that point because that's the common theme to people who get to an 800 FICO score is 3 credit cards over 7 years. You can get there with 1 credit card over 7 years, but ideally, because you don't know what's going to happen to that 1 credit card as time goes on. If you ever had the AT&T Universal card, do you use a calling card today, or you just make long distance phone calls with your cell phone? You probably just use your cell phone. Pretty much everybody does. If you had a calling card, credit card, how often are you using that calling card? Well, if that was your only credit card, guess what? AT&T Universal card got closed out and doesn't exist anymore. So if that was your only credit card, you don't have a credit card anymore. So all that history, if you had that for 20 years and you don't have it anymore, guess what? You might be starting over. You have some residual effect still there, but you want to have a group of credit cards so that you have variety, because we have to expect that something could happen to one of those credit cards, especially if it's a specialty card or a rewards card of some sort. Do airlines ever go out of business? Think about that. So all of these things, we want to be prepared for something going away. We want to have history. So she managed it well. She paid the bill on time. She had, I think, virtually a zero balance across the board. So, well, generally I would not suggest getting 30 credit cards. She actually managed it well, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So types of credit is an important thing. I would never close out a credit card account for any reason whatsoever, unless the terms are just so deplorable, so awful that I just can't even stomach it. That's about the only reason I would ever close out a credit card, because credit cards only get better with age. The highest FICO score I've ever seen was an 841. This gentleman had a American Express card that he had had since 1965. That's a lot of history. He just kept a little balance and just kept it open. 841, that's a very high FICO score. So, just think about it. Longevity is a good thing. And then the final and fifth aspect, the fifth factor to the FICO score is going to be inquiries. Am I applying for a lot of credit? Do I have a lot of new credit? That's 10% of the credit score. So 10% is inquiries and new credit. 10% is types of credit. Length of history is 15%. Balances, credit utilization, that type of stuff is 30%. And paying on time is 35%. So if we kind of meet that criteria, it goes beyond just paying on time. I really need to watch those ratios of my credit card levels. So keep that in mind.